So first of all, thank you so much for having us. I've only got 8 minutes, so I won't do too many preambles. But I just did want to say very quickly, this is so amazing to be able to talk to a sort of mix of people, because normally, as everyone who works in this world knows, it's very hard to get out of your bubbles. So I'd just like to say a massive thank you to everyone that's attending and taking your time to do that, because it's incredible to be able to get out of that bubble a little bit. Anyway, so slightly daunted to go after such a eminent scientist before. That was brilliant. Our approach is slightly different to something like the National Trust of Scotland and how they've done stuff. As the introduction said, we're a community-led marine habitat restoration charity. So what that basically means is a bunch of us who live in Ardfirm, which is on the west coast of Scotland, decided that the sea is not what it should be. We becoming this sort of general realization that when we look out at the ocean, it's empty compared to what it was. And as a community, we had no voice in that. We had no voice to influence the changes. And so that's what we decided to do. So we started Cromach. How do I can I change slides, or do you have to do it?
I have to do that.
All right, if you just sort of flick over the next one. Yeah, and this slide's quite interesting. These are my kids. And those shells that you saw there are oyster shells, and there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of these shells on the beach, but we have literally no oysters in the water. Now, you might think, well, it's just a shellfish, why does that matter? But oysters are one of these things like beaver that was talked about before. These are keystone species. These are really important animals because they do this amazing thing. They clean our ocean's water. And we used to have billions of these animals, and we've literally got hardly any left. Because we ate them in the past, we've dredged them, we've trawled them, we've poisoned them, we've given them diseases, and as a result, we've got very few left. And what they also do, as my kid was demonstrating there, is they build these amazing reefs underwater because they like to grow on each other. And these reefs create amazing habitat for young fish to spawn in, to grow up in, to have a safe place to be. And that enables your kind of commercial fish populations that we all like to eat to expand and actually have a place to start off in. And this is a very poignant picture for me because my kids are playing with oysters that are dead and have been dead probably for 500 years. These are very old shells they're playing with on the beach. And they're never going to get a chance to play with the real things. They're never going to get a chance to see the real things because there's just not enough of them around. And that's why we as a community decided to kind of get going with community habitat restoration. If you flip to the next slide, that'd be great. And we do two things. We do seagrass restoration, which is the stuff here that you see, which is the only underwater flowering plant in the ocean. It's an absolutely incredible species, and it does the same as the oysters. It creates these incredible 3D sort of structures where again fish can spawn. And we did a recent survey, and actually the muddy sediment, which is what you get across a lot of Scotland and the UK, does home quite a lot of different species and animals. But when you add in seagrass, you keep all of those animals, but you gain a whole bunch more. So you're essentially doubling the life per square meter, we're finding, by adding the seagrass back in. And again, just like the oysters, most of the seagrass is gone because of us for various reasons, pollution being one of the biggest ones. And the other thing, a bit like the peatland that you learned about earlier, the other thing this stuff does, which is incredible, is it sequesters carbon into the sediment, and it keeps it locked away. So in this climate crisis we find ourselves in, this is another great tool to be utilizing. You change the slide, please. So I think the key to the action that we took is good wine and having fun. Because when you're a volunteer, and then we started out doing this voluntary, guilt and the feeling of panic that drives people to volunteer and help nature, that only lasts so long, even for really committed people. Why not make it fun? And this is what we've tried to do. So all our meetings are actually really enjoyable meetings, even though we're aware of the biological crisis. We're aware of why we're doing this, because we're kind of at ground zero in the ocean in terms of the life that's in there. we made it fun. We made every meeting wine, food, and good chat. And this has enabled it to be a long process, because all these nature restoration processes are long. And if you've got a community based or a volunteer based, you have to have a good amount of fun doing it. Otherwise, it probably won't succeed. Change the slide, please. So this is our first cages that we put in for the oysters, 700 oysters. And we did this as Cromach, and they grew really well. And then we had a wonderful guy, Danny, who's our CEO, come along and say, well, listen, if I can get some funding, do you fancy, he was also in our community, do you fancy trying to grow this project? Change the slides. So this is when we decided to grow the project, and we built a nursery. And you can see the nursery is these floating cages, and we put the baby little oysters that we buy from a hatchery, they get put in the cages, and that's where they can grow safely. So they're not getting predated on. They're getting maximum temperature in the water because they're high up in the water body. They don't get fouling. It's a really good place for them to grow. Go to the next slide. And this is one of our restored oysters. This is one of the oysters that once they grow to a certain size, which is usually about, you can see that, about that sort of size, maybe 3-4 centimeters along, we can then put them on the seabed, and they're a bit bigger, a bit better protected from predators. And then they can start doing what they're doing. You can see the little gap in the shell there. That's where they're sucking the water in, and they're cleaning our water. You imagine an ocean that doesn't have its cleaning system. This is what we've got left. The cleaning system of our ocean is broken. There used to be billions of these things. So the water quality that we're hoping to get back to is super, super exciting. Go to the next one. And this is what we're hoping to see in the future. So this is a place where we're doing clumping. So we put the oysters back in one big heap rather than sort of spreading them around as a bit of an experiment. And they're doing really well like this. And you can see that all these oysters are all kind of clumped together. And when they have youngsters, they'll grow on top of those oysters, on top of those. And we're already seeing many, many species using the gaps in the oysters to hide away in. And then if you look on the shells, you can see all this growth on the shells. So you get many species actually using the oyster as a base to put themselves on. So they're fantastic, and we've all weirdly fallen in love with these slightly strange brown shelled animals. Go to the next one. So that brings on to seagrass. So how do we restore seagrass? You could probably just sort of slowly flick through all the seagrass images. Well, seagrass restoration is a little bit trickier. This is one of my kids snorkeling, having a look at the seagrass. And it basically involves, we have to collect, the problem with seagrass is like the oysters, is the populations become too fragmented. There's just not enough of them around. And what we have to do is we have to get into our existing seagrass bed, which is very small, and collect seed and try and expand that seagrass bed by putting the seed out in a way that it doesn't get eaten by crabs and various other things. So we collect the seed by hand, and we've got volunteers that help us do that as well. And then we process that seed in big tanks, which allows the seed to fall off the plant. And again, it's a really tactile thing. It's a good thing to get people involved, and we absolutely love doing it ourselves. And then that seed falls to the bottom of these tanks. We then collect the seed up. We separate it out, and you can see these little Hessian sacs. We put them into Hessian sacs, and that protects the seed from the predators. A bit like why we grew the oyster big. It allows us to put these little Hessian sacs back on the seabed, and the seeds can then hopefully germinate, like that picture there, which is the very first germinating hand-planted seagrass in Scotland. This was last year. So we're super excited by that. We also do lots of community outreach and stuff like that to allow people to experience the joy of seagrass and also learn the techniques that we've been using to do baseline surveys, where you go out and try and figure out what's there before you start any restoration, and then also monitoring what you do after you start a sort of restoration process. So that's probably at my end of my sort of time here. But I think the key thing that we're doing as a community is we're kind of cracking on. We're doing the science, we're doing it within the regulations, but we're in a crisis. And at the end of the day, if there's a crisis in your house and your house is burning down, there's people in the house that you need to get out. you need to go in and get them out. You don't have to have big consultations. We need to be moving quick on this stuff. So this is how we're doing it, working within the regulations, but just cracking on and learning as we go. And our ambition in the future is that I one day want to be able to swim over a seagrass bed like that, which is the most phenomenal environment to be in. I want to be able to swim for hours and not leave a seagrass bed, because at the minute it's like 10 minutes swimming and you're off most of our seagrass beds because they're so small and fragmented. So that's the dream.